Okay, so it's time for a challenge. In the previous video, we went through autoboxing and unboxing, and what we're going to do now is start a challenge, which is going to be for a simple banking application. So I'm just going to type out what is actually needed. Okay, so here is the task. So your job is to create a simple banking application, as I've mentioned. So there should be a bank class. Now that bank class should have the bank name, but also an array list of branches, which is a class. And each branch should itself have an array list of customers, which is another class. Now the customer class itself should have the customer name and also an array list of doubles, doubles being the object, the object wrapper version of the primitive type double, which is the list of transactions for that customer. So in other words, what we're doing is we're tracking transactions that a customer would make. So the customer class would have the name and the array list of doubles in that case, as I've mentioned. So for the branch, the functionality you need is to be able to add a new customer to that branch and for the initial transaction amount. So that would be in the scenario where it's a brand new customer who's walked into the bank and wants to open an account. So in other words, you need to add them to the branch and add their name and also the amount. Also want to add a transaction for an existing customer. So in other words, if they come back and want to add additional transactions. So you should be able to process an unlimited number of transactions for a given customer, but still be attached to that branch. So the customer that you're adding should still be part of that branch. And also we want to be able to show a list of customers for a particular branch as well. That's very important. And optionally a list of their transactions. So you can decide to show their transactions as well or not show them. And what you should be doing is using a demonstration of autoboxing and unboxing in your code. And my hint for that is the transactions is probably a good place to look for that. Also be sure to add data validation. So in other words, if you're adding a new customer to a branch, you'd want to check that that name wasn't used previously for that branch. And likewise, if you are adding an additional transaction for an already existing customer for a branch, you'd want to check that in fact they did exist first. Also think about where you're going to be adding this code. You know, where you're adding code to perform certain actions, making sure that you think you're putting it in the right class. For example, if you're doing something to do with branches, should probably be in the branches class and that sort of thing. But there may be scenarios you'll find that you're calling the functionality for a particular class from another class. So the hint with that one would be the bank. Nearly all your transactions that you're going to be running in your main class, your main method, that's going to be probably just using bank. So that's going to have a lot of methods, as you can see on the screen there, adding a new branch, adding a customer, adding a transaction, showing a list of customers. But probably what you'll be finding is that that bank class would be calling code from other classes. So that's what I'm getting at. So think about where you're going to be adding that code. All right, so I'm going to pause the video here. So go away and see if you can create something like this. And remember, it doesn't have to be terribly complicated. Just keep it pretty basic. The customer is literally only the name and the transactions at this stage. You don't need to store addresses or anything like that. The main thing is the relationship between the various classes and also the autoboxing and unboxing. So I'm going to pause the video here. So come back and start the video when you're ready to see what I've come up with. Okay, how did you get on? Did you figure it out? So let's go through with my implementation. What I'm going to do first is just open up the project window so we can see what we're doing here a little bit. And the first class that I'm going to create is the customer class. So in a design like this, when you're thinking about where do I start, I would always start from the bottom rung. So in this case, we know that the customer is a major part of this application because it's pretty well used everywhere. So we need to have that customer before we can write any other code. So I'm going to create that new class. So I said customer. And in terms of functionality, we're going to just have a name. So private string name, which will be of course the customer name. And we also want our array list of doubles. And this is going to be the transactions. So we're going to call that transactions. Next, we need a constructor. So the constructor is going to accept two parameters. So the first one is going to be the name. So we're just going to store the name. But the second parameter is the initial transaction. So this is when a customer is opening a new account for a particular branch. We want that initial amount. So we're going to put a double there. We're just going to send a regular double. And we're going to call that initial transaction or initial amount. So it'll be the initial transaction ultimately it's going to be, but we'll call it initial amount. So we have to think about how we're going to store that initial amount. We'll come back to that and we'll add that shortly. But the other thing we need here is we need a mechanism to add transactions. So as customers come back to the bank or to the branch, wherever the case may be, and actually add another transaction, we need to be able to store those in our array list. So we want another method, public void add transaction. We're going to accept a double. And notice it's the primitive type and not the object wrapper. And this will be this .transactions.add amount. And obviously that's converting from a primitive to the object wrapper, which we've got in our array list. So that's demonstrating Autoboxing. So getting back now to the class, the constructor in this class, to add that initial amount, what we can do is we can actually just call that add transaction. Literally, that's all we need to do. So to do that, before we actually do that, what we need to do is one other step. And we need to actually initialize the transactions because we've defined the array list of double transactions at the top there in the private field, but we haven't initialized it. So we need to initialize that first before we try and add anything to it. And of course, the constructor is a great place for initializing. So we're going to do this transactions equals new. And of course, that's going to be the array list of doubles. So then the next line is now that we've initialized it and we've saved the name, we can just do add transaction and pass the initial amount, and that's going to add that to our array list of transactions. So we're now handling the amount and also subsequent amounts as well. Next, what we want to do is we want to create some getters. And the getters are going to be, well, we'll do both of them, both the name and the transactions, because we might need those in another class. So that's our base customer class. There's not really a lot of processing there because a lot of the processing is in other places. So the next class I'm going to implement now is the branch. So I'm going to create a new class, branch. Now with this one, if you recall, going back to the main, with the branch, we need to be able to add a new customer and initial transaction amount. We also need to add additional transactions for that customer. So the branch, because we're actually adding a customer to a branch, we need to obviously store a list of customers in the branch. So to do that, coming back here, firstly we're going to assign the name, and that's going to be, in this case, the branch name. Private string, we'll call that name again. And we also need to add that list of customers. So what this means is we can have a separate list of customers for each branch. So it's using the array list, private list of customers, we'll call that customers. So that's the two fields we need. The constructor is going to be very simple. It's going to be initializing the string to whatever's been passed to it. Then we also need to initialize the array list just to make sure that it's ready to be adding records later. So this.customers equals new array list of customers, as you can see there. Just initializing that for the first time. We're also going to need the getter for the name. We'll probably implement that now because we want to be able to show the branch name on the screen at some point. So we're just going to use the getter for that. The next one we want is the new customer. So if you recall back in the main method when I typed it out, for a branch, we need to be able to add a new customer and an initial transaction amount, but we also need to add additional transactions for that customer branch as well. So going back to our branch, first one we're going to do is we're going to create our method, public, and we'll use a Boolean, and I'll explain why shortly, and we'll call this one new customer. And the parameters that are going to be passed to this are the name, we'll type it out properly, customer name in this case, and also the initial amount, so initial amount. The reason that we're going to use Boolean is because this could fail. If we pass a customer name that already exists, we want to actually return false to say that this transaction or this customer wasn't added because it was already on file. That's why we're using a Boolean. So to do that, of course, we need to add a find customer class so that we can actually test to see whether that class is actually being used or not. So the logic of the code will be something like if find customer, and it'll be customer name. If it equals null, then that's telling us that it's not already on file. So because this is a new customer method, if it's not on file, that's a good thing because it means that we can add it. So if that's the case, we're going to put a this.customers.add. So we're adding a new record, and you can see there on the screen, it's looking for a customer object. So we're going to do a new customer, creating a new class, and we're just going to pass those two parameters, customer name and initial amount. So obviously in that case, with the new customer, we're actually calling the constructor code in the customer class, which of course would be the right way of doing it. And this is all we need to do for the new customer. So we just need to do a return true at that point. A true meaning in this case, we successfully added it. And so therefore, if the code gets down to here, it means that find customer actually returned a customer. And that means that we can't add the new customer at that point because they already exist. So if that was the case, we want to return false. That's what return false is there. Okay, the next one we want to do is we need to actually add the add transactions. The add transaction is much the same as the new customer, but the test here is we're actually checking to make sure it is on file. And if it's not on file, we actually return false, because it means that we can't obviously add another transaction to a customer that doesn't exist. So the code is similar. So it would be public Boolean add transaction in this time, or add customer transaction. Let's type it out so it makes sense. Transaction, and it'll be string, customer name, and it'll be double amount. This time it's not an initial amount because they've already had that. So our logic would be if find customer name, if it's not equal to null, so in other words, something has been returned, so it is on file. If that is the case, then what we want to do there is we simply want to make sure we grab the existing customer record and update that by adding that amount to the transactions. So to do that, we're going to do customer, existing customer equals find customer. And what I might do is just clean this up a little bit because we've actually added a bit of extra code here. We don't want to call find customer twice there. So what I'm going to do is actually put this code like this, like so, calling it once, and then we're going to just do a test there. And we're just going to change this code just to existing customer. And by doing it this way, we're actually only calling find customer once. So instead of before, we've just used that one line, which was cool because we didn't need to actually use the object because we were actually testing for null. In this case, with add customer transaction, we actually are going to use that to update. So therefore it makes sense to save the object here and then use it within here when we actually get a result back. Okay, so if that's the case, so the customer is actually on file. So all we need to do is put existing customer dot add transaction amount. And obviously the add transaction method is from the customer. So we're actually executing the add transaction method, which is actually this method here. So obviously that's good because it's actually calling a method that's actually in the class. And what we could do there, the reason that that's a good idea, getting back to the customer class, we could actually add some validation in here. We could print a message to output it to a log or do some other sort of checking to make sure the transaction was in acceptable ranges, those types of things. In other words, what we're doing is we're making sure that we're calling the functionality that's appropriate for this class. If we're adding a transaction to a customer, this would be the logical place to do it, because anytime we want to make a change to the customer class, we would actually do it in that class. So that's why we're putting that there. So that's good. So we're just about done now with our branch. What we haven't done yet though is we haven't actually implemented the find. So let's just add that find so we can fix up that error. And actually what I haven't done yet is updated this here. So let's return the statuses. So return true, because that did succeed at that point. And then it gets down to here where it's returning false. It means that we weren't able to find a customer. So we should actually return false if that's the case. Okay, so the next one, it's find customer. So we're going to make that a private, because this is only a method that's used internally in this branch class, so we shouldn't be exposing it publicly. Anytime you're creating a class, you want to take care and consider each of your methods to see whether they need to be public or private. And usually, in a lot of cases, they can be private, and that makes it a lot easier from the point of view of someone using your class, because they don't have to worry about anything that's private, because they won't see that when they're looking at a list of methods that they need to work with. And it just makes it a lot easier, and it means that you can change a lot of things around, which we've talked about in previous videos. So we're going to return a customer in this case. So private customer, find customer, string customer name. And to do this, we need to go through our list of customer records that are in the array list. So for int I equals 0, I less than customers.size. So we're going to navigate through all the records. I++. Then the test that we're going to actually check for is we're going to put if this dot customers dot get I dot get name dot equals customer name. Then we want to return this dot customers dot get I. Otherwise, all the way down here, we actually want to return null. And what I'll do also with this, I'm going to clean this up a little bit as well, because you can see there's a problem there. We're actually retrieving the object. This line here is actually retrieving the object, and then actually we're retrieving it again. So it's just really double processing. So let's just do that by something like this. We'll put customer checked customer equals this dot customers dot get I. And then we're going to change this slightly to put if customers, like so. We're going to return check customer. So that just makes it a little bit more efficient looking at the code there now. So basically what we're doing is we're going through the list of all the customers that we've got stored for this branch, and we're testing it. We're actually, firstly, we're retrieving the one that's in the array list as we go through each and every element. Then what we're doing is we're checking to see whether the name for that customer is the same. In other words, it's a match to the customer name that's been passed to this method. And if you recall, the new customer and the existing, the new customer and add customer transaction methods are actually using this. They're actually passing the name of the customer. So if there's a match there, then we're going to return the customer entry that matched that from the array list. Otherwise, we're going to return null. And null actually means that there was no matches and that customer's not on file. So that's the find customer. And I think we're actually done with that now. So what we've got to do next is the bank class. And then what we need to do is wrap that up a little bit and add some code to actually test all this. So time is ticking on. So I'm going to end this video here, and we'll come back in the next video. We'll implement the bank class, as I said, and then we'll go through and start writing some test code in our main class. So I'll see you in the next video.